It is the early morning hours of April 3rd, 2026. The sky over the Karaj-Tehran corridor is violently torn apart, not by a low-cost drone, not by a rogue artillery shell, but by the most advanced, highest-value tactical stealth platform in the United States arsenal, an F-35A Lightning II. Target acquired, payload deployed. Precision-guided JDAM munitions slammed directly into the main span of the B-1 suspension bridge. We are talking about a $400 million architectural artery, soaring 136 meters high, vaporized into twisted steel and concrete dust in a fraction of a second. At the exact moment of this kinetic strike, civilian transport was moving across the causeway. The immediate verifiable assessment from the impact zone, at least 8 civilian fatalities and over 95 severe casualties sustained directly on the deck. The highway collapsed. The transit corridor was severed. That is the undeniable physical reality on the ground. But the reality being manufactured in Washington right now is something entirely different. The Pentagon press apparatus has already initiated emergency crisis communications. They are flooding the zone, framing this catastrophic destruction of civil infrastructure as a precise and controlled tactical operation. Anonymous defense officials are spoon-feeding Western media a synchronized, heavily sanitized narrative. The B-1 bridge was secretly serving as a critical logistics route, a vital artery for Iranian UAV transports and ballistic missile components. They are aggressively classifying the loss of life as minimal, unavoidable collateral damage, a necessary cost for theater security. Having served in military intelligence and analyzed strike packages at the strategic level, let me be absolutely clear about what that means. You do not deploy a $100 million stealth fighter to vaporize a major civilian suspension bridge simply to stop a convoy of drone parts. That is not a proportional disruption of logistics. That is a strategic decapitation strike disguised as a supply chain interdiction. This was not a calculated show of American military dominance. This was a projection of profound institutional panic. And the moment the dust settled in Tehran, the carefully constructed illusion of American deterrence shattered completely. Because if Washington's objective was to paralyze adversary launch capabilities, the mathematics of this operation failed before the JDAMs even hit the concrete. The smoke over the B-1 causeway had not even begun to clear before the strategic blowback materialized. And I am not talking about diplomatic protests or angry press releases from Tehran. I am talking about hard, ballistic realities entering the airspace. Within hours of the F-35A egressing the strike zone, the operational response was executed. Houthi forces in Yemen and Hezbollah units in Lebanon did not pause to assess. They did not retreat into a defensive posture. They initiated a coordinated multi-front ballistic missile retaliation. The very same day. Let me break down the asymmetric math of this engagement, because the mainstream media is structurally incapable of explaining it to you. In military intelligence, we track the exchange ratio. Washington expended millions of dollars in fifth-generation aircraft operational costs and precision-guided JDAMs to vaporize a $400 million civilian infrastructure node. The stated objective? To degrade logistics, sever the transfer of UAV components, and establish a renewed baseline of deterrence. The actual verifiable result? Zero operational degradation. The adversary's launch network wasn't just intact, it was immediately active. By launching synchronized ballistic assets from 2 entirely different geographic vectors, Yemen and Lebanon, the adversary proved that the decapitation of the B-1 bridge achieved absolutely nothing tactically. If the bridge was truly a critical bottleneck for missile and drone logistics, taking it offline should have forced a temporary paralysis. It did not. The munitions were already dispersed. The command and control links were fully functional. The strike was tactically meaningless. When an adversary absorbs a massive kinetic strike on its own soil and instantly fires back across multiple theaters, the deterrence model is dead. It is not merely failing, it is entirely offline. Western media anchors are currently staring into teleprompters, parroting the White House line that the United States is exercising maximum restraint. They are desperately trying to classify the targeting of civilian transit as a measured, proportional response. That framing is not just inaccurate, it is dangerously misleading. Maximum restraint does not look like stealth fighters dropping bunker-busting munitions on commuter bridges during traffic hours. What you are witnessing is a strategic short circuit. The U.S. military machine, unmatched in funding and technological sophistication, is striking static, high-visibility civilian targets because it cannot sustainably locate or suppress the distributed, mobile, and hardened launch capabilities of its adversaries. They hit the bridge because the bridge cannot move. They hit the bridge to manufacture the illusion of control. But the catastrophic failure of this kinetic strike is only half the story. To understand why the United States executed such a strategically hollow and desperate maneuver, you have to look away from the smoldering concrete in Iran and look directly at what was happening simultaneously inside the walls of the Pentagon. Because while that F-35 was delivering its payload, the American military command structure was quietly tearing itself apart. Let me take you inside the puzzle palace. Let me bring you into the five-sided building in Arlington, Virginia. Because what happened in Washington, D.C. on the exact same day the B-1 bridge was vaporized is the skeleton key to this entire crisis. While the mainstream media was obsessively looping footage of the smoldering concrete in Courage, a far more consequential detonation was happening behind closed doors at the Pentagon. On that exact same morning, April 3rd, the United States Army Chief of Staff, General Randy George, was abruptly and unceremoniously ousted from his position. He was forced into an immediate resignation. The civilian leadership decapitated the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the United States Army right in the middle of a live-fire, theater-level escalation. Now look at the official spin. CBS News reported the unusual departure, while the Pentagon's public affairs machine went into overdrive, deploying their most sanitized, bureaucratic language to mask the severity of the situation. They called it an internal restructuring. They framed it as a standard leadership transition. Let me translate that from Pentagon press speak into operational reality. You do not initiate a routine leadership transition of your top ground force commander while your stealth fighters are actively dropping JDAMs on foreign infrastructure. You do not restructure your high command while adversary ballistic missiles are simultaneously launching from Yemen and Lebanon. In military intelligence, we have a specific term for removing a Joint Chiefs-level commander during an active multi-axis kinetic exchange. We call it an operational panic. Having spent years analyzing command and control structures, I can tell you with absolute certainty that an ousting of this magnitude executed with zero transition period indicates a catastrophic fracture between the uniformed military brass and the civilian political leadership. This is a command rupture. General Randy George was responsible for the readiness, logistics, and force projection of the entire United States Army. If he is being removed while the airspace over the Middle East is saturated with incoming and outgoing ordnance, it means there was a fundamental, unbridgeable dispute about the trajectory of this conflict. It implies that the military professionals running the war game scenarios looked at the data, looked at the projected outcomes, and refused to endorse the civilian leadership's strategic delusion. When the military architecture refuses to validate a failing strategy, the political class does not change the strategy. They remove the general. The timing is the definitive proof. The B-1 bridge was not destroyed simply to disrupt a drone supply chain. The B-1 bridge was destroyed to dominate the news cycle. It was a kinetic distraction. Washington needed a high-definition explosion, a display of overwhelming technological violence to project an aura of total control while their own command structure was literally collapsing from within. They traded $400 million of civilian infrastructure and the lives of innocent commuters to buy a 24-hour media smokescreen. They needed the world to look at the F-35s in the sky so nobody would look at the chaos in the Pentagon briefing rooms. This is the operational signature of an empire operating on institutional desperation. Let me connect the dots for you because this is where the official narrative completely collapses. On one side of the globe, a $400 million civilian suspension bridge is reduced to rubble. 8 non-combatants are confirmed casualties, and nearly 100 more are severely injured on a daily commute. On the other side of the globe, the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the United States Army is unceremoniously taken off the board. These are not parallel events. They are the exact same crisis, manifesting on 2 different continents. When a global superpower is operating from a position of true strength, it does not need to vaporize civilian infrastructure to send a message. It does not need to sacrifice the lives of innocent commuters to prove its deterrence model works. True strategic dominance is quiet. It is the ability to project power without needing to deploy a $100 million stealth fighter against a traffic corridor. What we are witnessing right now is the exact opposite of dominance. This is a power reversal on a theater-wide scale. Washington is cornered. The Pentagon's strategic planning has systematically failed to contain the multi-front coordination between Iran, Hezbollah, and the Houthi network. The adversary is adapting in real time, dispersing its ballistic launch capabilities and maintaining a relentless operational tempo that American interceptor inventories simply cannot outlast. Faced with this catastrophic asymmetric reality, the civilian political leadership in Washington demanded a victory. They demanded a highly visible, undeniable display of kinetic capability. They needed an explosion large enough to dominate the 24-hour news cycle. But the military professionals, the seasoned tacticians like General Randy George, who understand the brutal arithmetic of this conflict, knew that a cosmetic strike against the B-1 bridge would not change the strategic calculus. They knew that dropping JDAMs on a civilian artery would not degrade the adversary's missile stockpile. It would only invite immediate, undeniable retaliation. And they were right. The retaliation from Yemen and Lebanon arrived within hours. But in the halls of the Pentagon, being operationally correct is often a fireable offense when the political class requires a scapegoat. General Randy George was removed because the system desperately needed someone to blame for the collapse of a regional containment strategy that was structurally doomed from the beginning. The military architecture is fracturing from within, torn apart by the friction between political optics and tactical reality. So who pays the price for this institutional dysfunction? The civilians on the Karaj-Tehran highway paid the price. Al Jazeera and Press TV broadcast the immediate aftermath, rescue teams extracting the casualties from the structural collapse. That footage is not just a localized tragedy, it is a strategic indictment. Those civilians were turned into collateral damage to feed a media narrative. They were sacrificed to camouflage a command rupture in Washington. This is the macro reality of the April 3rd operations. The United States government orchestrated a tactical breach of a civilian artery to mask a strategic breach in its own command structure. They are attempting to bomb their way out of an unwinnable political corner. And the adversaries are watching this institutional panic unfold with complete clarity. They see a Pentagon that is fighting itself, a leadership more focused on managing its domestic press cycle than managing the actual battle space. The illusion of Western military invulnerability has not just been cracked, it has been completely dismantled from the inside out. The dust over the B-1 bridge is settling, but the airspace over the Middle East is currently on fire. Right now, as you watch this, Houthi and Hezbollah ballistic trajectories are entering their terminal glide paths. The coordinated retaliatory strikes are saturating early warning radars across multiple theaters. Washington traded 8 innocent lives and a $400 million infrastructure node for a headline. But here is the brutal, unforgiving reality of modern warfare. You cannot intercept a ballistic missile with a press release. You cannot shoot down a saturation strike with a sanitized Pentagon talking point. The air defense batteries currently desperately tracking these incoming targets are operating under a fractured chain of command. The United States military is attempting to manage a multi-axis, synchronized theater-level assault at the exact moment its top ground force commander has been unceremoniously removed from the board. General Randy George is gone. The institutional knowledge, the established relationships, and the operational cohesion of the Army's highest echelon have been detonated just as surely as that bridge in Karaj. Think about the operational paralysis this creates. In a ballistic missile engagement, the window for decision-making is measured in seconds. It requires absolute, frictionless trust between the forward theater commanders and the Pentagon brass. When the generals inside the five-sided building are fighting for their own political survival, when they are looking over their shoulders wondering who the defense secretary is going to purge next, they are not focused on the radar screens. They are focused on their careers. That is how empires lose wars. They do not lose them because they run out of weapons. They lose them because the political leadership destroys the military architecture from the inside out to avoid admitting a strategic failure. The deterrence model is dead. The asymmetric math has broken the American interceptor inventory. The political class is using civilian blood to cover up an institutional panic, and the adversaries know it. They are not dialing back, they are dialing in. We are watching the collapse of a superpower's regional hegemony, broadcast live in high definition. The strike on the B1 bridge was not a display of strength. It was the desperate thrashing of a wounded giant, lashing out at a static target because it can no longer control the dynamic battlefield. But here is the question that should keep every defense planner, every military analyst, and every citizen awake tonight. This was just a coordinated strike from the Houthi and Hezbollah networks. This was merely the opening salvo of the retaliation. What happens next week? What happens when the adversary decides to test this fractured, headless Pentagon with a swarm of hypersonic glide vehicles? What happens when the next wave enters the atmosphere and the generals in Washington are too busy fighting an internal political civil war to issue the intercept order? You won't hear the answer on the nightly news, but you will see it in the sky. I will be monitoring the satellite feeds and the interceptor burn rates. Make sure you are subscribed because the next 48 hours are going to change the geopolitical map forever. Stay alert.